Today, I would like you to imagine that you are stepping into a quiet room filled with old scrolls and ancient parchments. Each one holds a story you may think you know. Perhaps you have heard these tales as a child, or maybe you discovered them much later. Either way, these stories are like paintings hung in a familiar hallway. Most of the time, you walk past them without a second glance. You think you know what they show, what they mean, and what they want you to learn. But what if we slow down? What if we turn the light at a different angle so that shadows fall in new places? What if we look closer and find details we never noticed before? This is what Bible Stories with a Twist is all about. We are not here to argue what is correct or incorrect. We are not here to prove facts from old texts. Instead, we are here to play with the stories, to stretch them, reshape them, and see how they might speak to our own hearts right now. We have no rules set in stone. You can agree, disagree, or form your own thoughts. The goal is to show that stories, even very old stories that many have read for centuries, can still surprise us. They can still spark new ideas and help us see ourselves and our world in fresh ways. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a handful of small stones that you have picked up over many years. To you, they might seem ordinary, but if you hold them up to the light, you might notice tiny patterns, colors, and textures that were invisible before. Suddenly, these stones feel like treasures. In the same way, these ancient tales can feel new, shimmering with unseen possibilities. So let me ask you, when was the last time you questioned a story you thought you fully understood? When was the last time you let your mind wander beyond the usual path and see what else might be waiting there? Let us begin with one of the most famous stories of all, the tale of a young shepherd named David and a mighty giant called Goliath. The story of David and Goliath. Beyond the giant, picture, if you will, a wide valley. On one side stands an army of well-trained soldiers, their armor gleaming, their weapons sharp. On the other side are the underdogs, the ones who seem too weak, too small, too unprepared for any real struggle. And there in the middle, towering above them all, stands a giant named Goliath. He represents fear, brute strength, and an obstacle that seems impossible to overcome. The common telling of this story might be the small hero David faces the giant, Goliath, and triumphs with faith, courage, and a well-aimed stone. We learn that even the smallest person can overcome the largest challenge. It is a comforting lesson, one that speaks to hope, resilience, and the belief that the world's giants can be brought down by simple means. But let us tilt our heads and look again. What if Goliath is not just a warrior of great size? What if Goliath stands for something more subtle, something harder to name? Maybe Goliath is the feeling you get when you look at the world and think, I cannot make a difference. Maybe Goliath is the voice in your head that says, you are not strong enough, you are not smart enough, you are not worthy. In that sense, David's victory is not just the victory of a person with a slingshot over a powerful opponent. It is the victory of faith over despair, courage over doubt, and possibility over hopelessness. That small stone hurled through the air might stand for a moment of clarity, the spark of an idea, or the quiet decision to try anyway, even when the world whispers that you will fail. But there is another twist we might consider. What if Goliath is not just a challenge to be defeated, but also a mirror that shows us our own fears? When David steps forward, he does so not because he is the strongest person there, but because he refuses to be ruled by panic. Perhaps Goliath reflects back at us the image of our own hesitation and insecurity. By facing Goliath, David forces us to ask, are we in some ways our own giants? Every time you doubt your ability to learn a new skill, to reach out to someone, to pursue a dream that seems distant, Goliath's shadow falls over you, And each time you pick up a simple stone, the stone of effort, the stone of persistence, the stone of curiosity, you are taking aim at that inner giant. Maybe the greatest lesson is not just that the small can defeat the big, but that the boundaries we see might not be as solid as we think. Perhaps we are capable of more than we dare to believe. The parable of the Good Samaritan, challenging assumptions. Now let us turn to another well-known story, the Good Samaritan. In its simplest form, this tale tells of a traveler who is robbed and left wounded by the roadside. A priest passes by and does not help. A well-regarded citizen passes by and does not help. Then comes a Samaritan, someone viewed with suspicion and disdain by the people who first heard this story. And this unexpected figure stops, shows compassion, and cares for the wounded man. From this, most of us learn: show kindness to everyone, even to strangers. Love knows no boundaries of race, religion, or nationality. It is a beautiful lesson, and one that has inspired countless people to care for those in need. But let us gently rearrange these pieces and see what else we can find. What if the wounded traveler is not just one person on one road, but a symbol of anyone who is suffering silently in our world today? Perhaps the Good Samaritan stands for the idea that help can come from the most unlikely sources, if we are willing to look beyond our assumptions. Could it be that the story is inviting us to notice our own blind spots, our own quiet judgments? We often decide who is good and who is bad based on rumors, appearances, or old stereotypes. The Good Samaritan story might ask, what if the person you have always thought of as a stranger or an outsider is actually the very one who can help you see the world more clearly? Push this idea further, and you might wonder, could the Good Samaritan also be a nudge to recognize that the systems we trust might not always care for those who are hurting? The priest and the other passerby might represent respected figures, the kind of people you would expect to do the right thing, yet they do nothing. This is not to cast blame, but to notice that goodness does not always come wrapped in the clothing we predict. Kindness might emerge from the places we least expect, challenging the stories we tell ourselves about who belongs and who does not. Think about the labels we use today. We might place people into categories based on their background, their beliefs, their language, or their appearance. The Good Samaritan asks, can you see beyond these labels? Can you break them open, find the human heart inside, and recognize that help and kindness have no borders? Now imagine the wounded traveler is not a single person, but a community in need. Imagine that rather than walking by, we stop and truly see them. Maybe the moral is not only about personal compassion, but also about questioning why so many are left by the roadside in the first place. Is it enough to be kind on an individual level? Or should we also ask why certain people keep falling into harm's way? The Good Samaritan could be quietly whispering that we must look deeper beyond surface kindness to the roots of suffering. Beyond the text, exploring the context. Why stop here? The beauty of stories that have been told and retold over countless generations is that they carry layers of meaning. When we consider the culture, the time, and the place in which these stories were first shared, we begin to see them in a new light. They were not told in a vacuum. They were shaped by the languages, traditions, and struggles of people who lived very different lives from ours. If we picture the world in which David stood before Goliath, we might consider what people feared and hoped for at that time. Perhaps they were surrounded by uncertainty, violence, shifting alliances, and worries about their future. The story of a small shepherd defeating a giant might have given them courage to face challenges that did not involve swords and shields at all. It might have told them, yes, you are small. Yes, you face mighty problems, but do not give up. Even the mightiest foe can be brought low. Similarly, when we think about the Good Samaritan, we have to imagine what it meant to those who first heard it. The idea of a despised outsider showing mercy would have been shocking, a story that turned common beliefs on their heads. The people who told and retold it might have been nudging their community to look in the mirror and question their own prejudices. As we explore these contexts, we must remember that we do not have to accept any one interpretation as final. In fact, the real treasure lies in discovering how the stories evolve as we learn more about the times in which they were told and the people who treasured them. Each new piece of background, each glimpse into an ancient world, can open a new door of understanding. Think of it this way. The stories are like seeds planted in the soil of their own era. Understanding the climate, the soil, and the weather of that era helps us understand how the seed took root and what kind of plant it grew into. But now, we have transplanted that seed into our own garden, our own time, our own culture, and our own minds. The plant might look different here. It might bear new fruit. The question is, what kind of fruit do we want it to bear? Deepening the twist, finding your own reflection. Remember, we are not here to settle on one truth. We are here to discover how these stories can become living mirrors. Perhaps David and Goliath can teach us about facing our inner shadows. Perhaps the Good Samaritan can remind us that kindness can bloom in unexpected places, and also that we might need to question the world that leaves so many in need. But let us go beyond these well-known tales. Think of any story you have heard many times. Stories of miracles, of wandering travelers, of people lost and found, of families divided and reunited. What if you pick just one and ask, is there a meaning beneath the meaning? Look for details you never noticed. Ask what the characters might feel, deep inside, beyond what the surface text says. Let your mind wander. There is no rule that says you must read these stories in the same way everyone else does. You might wonder why this matters. After all, these are old stories, right? Tales from another age. But the power of stories is that they slip through time. They carry whispers of truth, even if not in the form of literal facts. They carry patterns of human behavior, dreams, fears, longings, and hopes. They show us that the problems of the past might reflect the problems of the present, and that the solutions we imagine today could have roots in the lessons of long ago. When you allow yourself to see these stories as flexible, shape-shifting companions, they can become guides. Not guides that give you strict orders, but gentle guides that ask questions instead of giving answers. Through these questions, you might discover new ways of thinking about life, love, justice, courage, and compassion. A journey through imagination. Imagine for a moment that you are walking through a great museum of stories. On one wall hangs the painting of David facing Goliath. On another, a sculpture of the Good Samaritan bent down to help a traveler. Farther along, you might see scenes of prophets crying out, of families fleeing danger, of leaders wrestling with their conscience. Each of these pieces invites you to step closer, to see them not as flat images, but as windows into human nature. As you wander through this museum, you can crouch down, tilt your head, and peer at these stories from strange angles. Perhaps by doing so, you notice the brushstrokes, the way the colors blend, the hidden figure in the background. The stories are never just what they seem at first glance. They are layered and complex because human life is layered and complex. And here is another twist. As you look at them, they look back at you. They challenge you to ask, what is my own Goliath? Where have I ignored someone in need, and why? Which walls have I built between myself and others, and how can I tear them down? Suddenly, these stories that seem so old and distant begin to speak directly to your heart. They become dialogues rather than monologues. They become catalysts for personal reflection, not just lessons read on a page. The power of new interpretations. Some might worry that by exploring new interpretations, we might lose the original meaning of these tales. But think of it differently. Stories can hold many meanings without losing their original shape. They are not boxes with only one thing inside. They are more like treasure chests with multiple compartments. You can find traditional teachings in one drawer, personal insights in another, and a social commentary tucked away in a hidden nook. In fact, the ability of a story to evolve with time, to speak differently to each generation, is part of its magic. The people who first told these stories could not have imagined the world we live in now, the cities, the technology, the global connections. Yet their stories still matter, still resonate, still inspire. This is proof that stories can grow, stretch, and breathe alongside us. Embracing the unknown. Let us also acknowledge that as we twist and turn these stories, we may reach places of uncertainty. We may disagree with each other. We may struggle to find a clear conclusion. That is all right. Uncertainty can be a friend, inviting us to learn more, to dig deeper, or simply to rest in the knowledge that not everything needs to be fully explained. When we embrace the unknown, we open the door to wonder. We free ourselves from the need to lock each story into one interpretation. Instead, we allow it to float through our minds, inspiring new questions each time we revisit it. Over time, as we change and grow, the stories might speak to us differently. What seemed simple yesterday might appear profound today, and what seemed profound yesterday might seem too narrow tomorrow. Connecting to the present moment. Consider the world we live in right now. It is filled with challenges that can feel overwhelming, social issues that seem impossible to solve, personal struggles that leave us feeling small and powerless, and deep questions about who we are and what we value. In such a world, it might help to remember that we are not the first people to wrestle with meaning, justice, and hope. David and Goliath remind us that the world is full of giants, both real and imagined, and that we need not face them alone. The Good Samaritan reminds us that kindness can and should transcend boundaries, and that we must look beyond the surface to find solutions that help not just individuals, but whole communities. As we explore these stories, we might find ourselves asking, how can we apply these lessons to our own lives? Can we be like David and trust that courage and faith, whatever those words mean to us, are stronger than fear? Can we look in the mirror and see that we often stand in our own way, and that by recognizing our inner Goliaths, we can move forward? And when we think of the Good Samaritan, can we go beyond the idea of helping one person and also think of transforming the systems that leave so many people by the roadside? Can we recognize that healing is not just a single act of kindness, but a process of changing how we live, how we share, and how we care? Inviting your interpretations, I encourage you to take these ideas and run with them. There is no final destination here. There is no test at the end. This is not about learning a set of correct answers, but about opening your mind to possibilities. If you find meaning in these new interpretations, wonderful. If you disagree, equally wonderful. Your disagreement might lead you to your own fresh insights, your own new twists. The goal is to keep the conversation alive, to keep stirring the pot of old stories so that new flavors emerge. Share these thoughts with others. Listen to what they have to say. You might be surprised how differently someone else views the same story. Their perspective might open a door you never noticed, leading you to a hidden room filled with bright new ideas. Conclusion: re-examining faith through a new lens. We have reached the end of this exploration, but truly, it is only the beginning. We started by looking at old stories that many of us think we know well. We challenged ourselves to twist and turn these tales, to imagine that the giant could be our own fears, that the Good Samaritan could be a hint to break down social walls, and that the world in which these stories first flourished was a very different place, one we can try to understand better. What we discovered is that these stories can still speak to us in surprising ways. They can ask us big questions. Are we brave enough to face our inner doubts? Are we open-minded enough to see kindness where we least expect it? Are we curious enough to learn more about the past so that we might see the present more clearly? As you step away from this video, carry these questions with you. Let them breathe in your mind. The next time you encounter a familiar story, be it from an ancient text, a childhood memory, or a modern retelling, pause and wonder, what else might it mean? What new angle can I explore? So let this be an invitation. Keep re-examining these stories through a new lens. Keep challenging yourself to look beyond the surface. And remember, there is no right or wrong way to do this. There are only new paths waiting for you, new sparks of insight ready to be discovered. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now it is your turn. Share your thoughts, your twists, your surprises. Let us keep the conversation alive. Keep shining different lights on old tales until we find ourselves amazed by what we never saw before.